Hello, my name is Julie, and today I'm going to be talking about the books that I read in January and February. I am so brave for doing this because I am so tired. I read 10 books in January and I read 10 books in February, and I am extremely proud of myself. I feel like I've had a pretty good start to my 2023. As always, I read just about a little bit of everything, got results from those books that were a little bit of everything, but definitely a couple of candidates for best book of the year. So let's have Past Julie talk about the books I read in January. I don't know about you, but I agonize over what my first book of the year is going to be because I want it to be perfect. I want it to set the tone for the year, and I think I did that successfully with Babel by R.F. Kuang. This is a historical fantasy that is set in the 1800s at Oxford University. Our main character, Robin Swift, is Chinese and was taken away from China when his entire family died of disease, and his benefactor, a professor of language at Oxford, took him away and raised him in a very strict household of studying language 24/7, and now he's being accepted into Oxford's translation college, which is a very big deal in this world because the magic system is about translation. Bars of silver can be inscripted with translations of words that have different connotations, and that can change the properties of something that is touching it. This book is about how translation is an act of violence upon the original work. There is no true faithful translation, and deals heavily with colonization. Robin is part of a group of students, 3 out of the 4 of whom have been in the same situation as Robin, where they were from a different country and essentially taken away from their culture and raised specifically for the purpose of just using that language to heighten the power of the British Empire. This is such an accomplishment. I've read R.F. Kuang before. I liked the Poppy War series. I appreciated it more than I actually enjoyed the reading of it. I mean, obviously it's not, a walk in the park type series, but I absolutely loved this from the very beginning. I think partially because it is written in a different writing style. It is intentionally written to emulate 1800s Bildungsromans, and I think that this story was just pulled off so well, and the messages were so strong as their characters realize they think that they have more room to change society from within than they do, in how they have to take matters into their own hands. This book had such a large impact on me. The highlight of my day was getting to sit down with a glass of wine and read my portion of this book. I just wanted to take as much time with it, but also blow through it to know what was going to happen. Our characters are so fascinating, and you see the different ways that they have to interact with people to be accepted, and how some people, no matter how much you love them, will not support your cause and will not understand you and think they know better. This was a easy 5-star, and R.F. Kuang, I will pick up everything that she writes, but I would particularly love to see more titles that have this sort of tone to it from her. Then I read The Paulbearer Club by Paul Tremblay. By now, this video is already up, but I read this for my video of reading the lowest rated books on my Goodreads TBR. This is an interestingly structured story. So it is the memoir written by Art Barbara, which is a pseudonym, of his relationship with his friend Mercy back when they were in high school, and then when they met when they were older. But Mercy has come across the memoir, and she has made her own notes in the margins about how much Art is actually telling the truth. But there is also a little element of horror, as Art believes that Mercy is some sort of vampire. More specifically, this is about the coming of age. The vampire storyline is a little bit on the back burner, and only comes to the forefront a couple of times. This at first was really intriguing to me. I did enjoy Mercy's interludes and all the little comments that she make. There's one that says in all caps, "What the fuck are you talking about?" Thought it was really funny. Unfortunately, this, even though it's very short, print's pretty big, it's like 250 pages, I could not get through this for the life of me. Were it not short and were it not for a video, I would have DNF'd this, and I wish I would have. I think I missed whatever the point of this story was supposed to be. While there were a couple parts that I liked the music scene part of the latter half of the book. There were some scenes that are horror, and those scenes were not horror enough that I liked them. The plot of the story itself didn't have enough going on that I just could not stay focused on reading this book, and I wanted to read anything else. But I ended up giving this 2-star, 2.5. This really didn't work for me. If you want to hear more of my thoughts on this, you can go check out that video. For my book club, Free of Clubs, our theme for January, February, and March is forced proximity. So our January book was Sweet Hand by N.G. Peltier. This is the first book in the Island Bites series. So our main character, Charisse, is a baker. She runs a pastry company out of her home. She's very passionate about it. And not too long ago, she had a very public breakup with her cheating ex-boyfriend, who is in the music scene. So she has decided that she is going to not date anybody for a long time, and she thinks that her sister's wedding coming up should certainly help her mother get off her back about dating. Unfortunately, this has only made the pressure worse. She is the maid of honor at the wedding, and it turns out that she is going to have to work with the best man, who is someone who she has had a rivalry with, and that is Kieran, who is also in the music scene, and these two have to work together to put together events coming up towards the wedding. So this book did not work for the book club. I think I was the only one who actually finished it, and I kind of just told anybody else, hey, it doesn't get better, so if you want to DNF it, go for it. The writing style of this was kind of strange. I think it could have used some more editing. There were bones here, like in the synopsis, that I think really could have worked. We have two people who are very passionate about their passions that they have turned into their jobs. Great, I really love that. We have sort of quid pro quos going on. I love a wedding plot. We don't even get to see the wedding. More than anything, I thought the romance was entirely unbalanced. Kieran is in love with Charisse, and Charisse does not care nearly as much, and we see both of their perspectives, and we can tell that that's true. There also is this whole thing that Charisse is supposed to like not want to date musicians. They go on and on about that, but we don't actually see in her POV her seeing any obstacles. She just says, oh, well, I can't date him. There isn't any thought of, I can't date this guy because he is going to hurt me, or he is going to be a cheater, or he has done this in the past. It's nothing like that. It's just, oh, well, I can't date him. Also, once the steamy scenes came in, the characters only thought about sleeping with each other, and the romance was entirely gone. So this did not work for me at all, but luckily it was fast-paced and the side characters were funny enough for me to not DNF it. This ended up being a 2-star for me, unfortunately, and you know what? This being the 10th book we've read for the book club, having 9 good books and only 1 bad book is a pretty good track record. Then I listened to We Have Always Lived in the Castle by Shirley Jackson. This is a novella, very short book about a family who suffered a tragedy years ago. They were a rich old family in town. People really didn't like them because of that, but then almost all of the family was poisoned and died. There were only 3 survivors: Mary Cat, who was sent to her room without dinner, Constance, who did not eat the poisoned food, and their uncle, who only had some and is now disabled because of the incident. And a distant relative of theirs comes and starts shaking things up, shifting the stasis that the family has after this tragedy. I did really like Shirley Jackson's writing style here. It definitely felt really creepy. Unfortunately for me, because she wrote The Lottery, I was expecting to be absolutely taken aback by a plot twist. And there is a twist in this book, but it was something that I predicted from the very beginning. End of the book was a little bit lackluster for me because I was waiting with this build up, expecting a payoff that already came. So I ended up rating this a 3.5. Then I read The Terraformers by Annalee Newitz. I was given an e-arc from NetGalley and the publisher to read this early, so thank you so much to them for gifting me this because I loved The Future of Another Timeline by this author, and I do have Autonomous that I plan on reading, but this is a very interesting science fiction that takes place in 3 parts, and it's over hundreds of years. We see different parts of the evolution of this planet that is being terraformed. So in the beginning portion, we see people who have been living on this planet clash with a company who has bought it out and want to use all their resources. In the later parts, we see how the events of the first and second part have affected things down the line, and how these same questions are being brought up and only later are they solved by people who are determined. There are a lot of really interesting things about this world. Buildings are essentially grown. We have conquered bioengineering and we can basically grow whatever we want. People aren't really born anymore, they are grown. Any type of person that we make, so that could be an animal, a humanoid person, or an AI, robot, cyborg, they can be given intelligence. But some people are given intelligence and then put limiters on how then they can communicate with other people. It is eugenics in a way that a lot of people aren't even aware of. So this was just so imaginative, and you can tell that Annalee Newitz is an expert in their field. They have studied the history of urban centers and have nonfiction articles and books out in this subject, which is something that I am really interested in reading. This book is just so well researched, but also a fun beating the man story with a bunch of different characters who are connected to the previous parts. Because it is 3 shorter plots, it might not necessarily have as much of a punch as a story that is 300 pages long, but I was just left thinking about what this world entails for so long, and I had a lot of fun reading this. So I ended up giving this a 4-star, 4.25, and I think that this could be for fans of Becky Chambers, but it's a little bit more about the concepts than the characters, even though the characters are fun. And then I read A Memory Called Empire by Arkady Martine. This was the Spacebound Book Club book for December, and I didn't get around to it till January, but I am so glad that I did. This is a sci-fi story about our main character Mahit, who lives on a giant space station, who is on the border of the Tixkalan Empire. They plan on absolutely conquering all of the universe that they can see, and Mahit has been trained to be the ambassador to this empire. However, the ambassador that is already there is suddenly killed, and she does not have the information that he has had for the last 15 years and is sent with a copy of his consciousness that is 15 years out of date. So she goes to the empire and is trying to figure out what happened to her predecessor, why he was killed, and the politics that are going on in this empire. This was so much fun. I did not want to put this book down. I did feel like it had some similarities to Babel in that we're talking about language and cultural differences, because both of our main characters are the cultural other. The technology of this was really interesting. So there's the memory implants. That was such an interesting aspect of this. And I just really love Mahit as a main character. She has several attempts on her life, and she has a few people who are allies in the Empire, and they are just trying to survive and solve a mystery. I thought the mystery was great. I really love the technology. I love learning about the Empire and all the different moving pieces of the politics. And even though all these people are human, it definitely made them feel alien. This is not something that I would recommend to somebody as their first science fiction. There's a lot of things going on, but if political fantasy or sci-fi is something that's already your bag, absolutely you should read this. And I gave this a 4.5 star, and I can't wait to continue in the series. Then I listened to a bunch of audiobooks while I was reading possibly the longest book I've ever read. So the first audiobook that I listened to was Kingsbane by Claire Legrand. This is the second book in the Imperium trilogy, which is a young adult, new adult fantasy series where there is prophesied to be a Blood Queen who will end the world and a Sun Queen who will bring peace back to the world. And 1,000 years ago, there was Riel, the Blood Queen, who we follow her perspective as she finds out that she is one of these prophesied queens, goes through trials, but we also know that she gives birth to a daughter that is then sent 1,000 years in the future by a person with time traveler magic, and that is Eliana, who finds out that she might also have these prophesied powers. So we have a mother and daughter separated by 1,000 years. We have two different fantasy worlds. One of them is like traditional kingdoms, magic is alive, and then we have more of an industrial fantasy where guns are a thing and magic's been dead. The first book in this series was a really interesting and surprising book that I really loved. Book 2, unfortunately, I don't think it lived up exactly to book 1. Riel is starting to be a little bit meaner, and we know that she's supposed to turn into the Blood Queen, but I thought that some of her development here didn't necessarily match with how she acted in the first book. I really liked that we were experimenting with magic more in this book, learning more about the world building, what the angels are up to. Riel's perspective was my favorite in the last book, but Eliana was the more interesting plot in this one as she is trying to find her magic when there is nobody to teach her about magic. But overall, I felt like this one was not as well plotted as book 1 was, and I wasn't finding myself paying attention as raptly as I was to book 1. So I'm giving this a 3.5. Hopefully the last book I will enjoy as much as I enjoyed the first book, but I'm still planning on finishing out this series. The next audiobook was the final revival of Opal and Neve by Donnie Walton. This is a historical fiction about fictional famous musicians, Opal Jewel and Neve Charles. So before either of these people were famous, they were in a duo, and they were making pre-punk music that didn't really have a genre, was very political, and was revolutionary for the time and wasn't appreciated as much until later. And we know that they split. Neve Charles became very famous, and Opal Jewel sort of faded into the background and only has like a cult following. And there are rumors that the two of them are going to go on a revival tour together. An editor of a popular magazine is interviewing people for a book to do an oral history of Opal and Neve. She starts finding out more about the two of them, and things get a little out of hand, and so the reporter is trying to find out more about her father. He was killed in a riot that was photographed and made and put Opal and Neve on the map because of it, and sees how other people are reacting about what they say really happened about that night. So this was an interesting historical fiction. It is told similarly to Daisy Jones and the Six, where it is in interviews. So this audiobook did have a full cast. I will say the audio mixing could have used a little bit of work because there were some male characters who I swear they were whispering into the microphone and I couldn't hear them no matter how high I turned up my volume, and then it would switch to a woman and she'd be bursting my eardrums. I think when it's historical fiction about a famous person, I really want them to feel like real people, and I didn't 100% get there. It definitely still felt like I was listening to a fictional story. I didn't have those images painted in my head as much as some other books that I've read that have a similar pitch to this. But I liked a lot of the messages that this said about Black Lives Mattering, how a lot of allyship can be performative. You assume the best of people, but sometimes people show their true colors, and that's who they really are. I thought that was an interesting way to take the book that I didn't necessarily think it was going to go. And I liked that we didn't necessarily get answers to everything, because some mysteries that are lost to time, that we will never truly know exactly what happened because people will lie. There's not a record of everything. I'm giving this in between a 3 and a 4. There were some things that I liked, but I wish I felt more connected to these characters and that they felt more real. And the last audiobook I listened to was Pet by Akwaeke Emezi. I listened to this in one sitting as I was driving home from Virginia. Our main character, who is a young trans girl, lives in a world where there were monsters, and all of the monsters have been purged from society by angels who look like everyday normal people, but now children don't really know what monsters used to look like. When our main character, Jam, pulls a strange creature out of one of her mother's paintings, the creature, who is called Pet, says that Jam's best friend has a monster in his house and he is there to hunt the monster down. So I think this was a really interesting short novel that could be digestible to a lot of age groups. It does deal with child abuse, but again, I think it's done in a way that could be digested for the YA audience. This is very short and it is sweet in that the main characters are trying to do justice for terrible things that have happened to somebody that they love, and I think a lot of the messages that were there were very good. Honesty with your friends, and how a lot of people want to ignore that bad things happen and that bad things can be done by people that you love, and how you can be blinded by that. Honestly, I wished it would have been a little bit longer, that we would have had a larger plot going on, maybe found out a little bit more about like the sort of epilogue, like what happens after the monster is confronted, sort of thing. But I think that this had a really good message and will be something that I will recommend to a bunch of people, especially because it is so short and easy to read. And the last book I read in January was Oathbringer by Brandon Sanderson. This book comes in at 1,250 pages. It is a long one. This is the third book in the Stormlight Archives, which is one of my favorite series of all time. I'm so glad I finally got around to this. This is about a world called Roshar, where high storms are constantly barraging the planet, and that has changed the ecosystem and how people live a lot. Basically, there were these godlike figures called the Heralds who lived thousands of years ago, who were defending humanity over and over from these periods called the Desolations that were caused by creatures called Voidbringers that would try to kill off humanity. But the thing is that the Heralds, about 1,000 years ago, gave up and decided to let humanity fend for themselves, and finally a new desolation is coming, and the old order of the Knights Radiant, who are these people who fought off the Voidbringers, need to come back. And this is Dalinar's book, so we're following this man who used to be this mighty general who was absolutely a monster on the battlefield, and we see his change over his life. Meanwhile, we have a lot of questions being answered about magic and the origins of this world and its peoples, and this is so interesting. I love this series to death. You can see that I tabbed up this book with quotes that I really loved, but also parts that I might want to reference back to and might be important later. I cannot say enough about the series, but if you do want to hear me say more, you can go to my video. My highest rated books on my Goodreads TBR is where you can hear me talk all of my thoughts about Oathbringer in a mostly spoiler-free manner. The first book that I read in February was for reading the lowest rated books on my TBR. If you'd like to see that vlog, you can find it here. And that is Leave the World Behind by Rumaan Alam. This is a literary fiction with a little bit of horror, and it is about a white family that goes to an Airbnb for their vacation, and not long after they get there, the older black couple that owns the house shows up and has to stay there because they say that there has been some sort of emergency that has caused chaos in New York City. There's a blackout across the East Coast, and it's these two families having to cohabitate when they don't have any information about what could be nothing or could be an apocalyptic situation. So the reason I think that this is so low rated is it doesn't really focus on that apocalypse, and that was why I was interested in it. It's the end of the world, but the characters don't know anything about it. They get very little information. They are cut off from technology, so all they have is their own fear and the people around them. I really loved the writing style. Although this is more literary, it has almost a horror writing style where it's very poetic about things that can be gross or scary. It focuses on fear and paranoia. And even though I knew that I wasn't going to get a ton of answers, it kept me on the edge of my seat and kept me guessing. It had a little bit more of a horror element than I thought it was going to. So that did pleasantly surprise me, but I would definitely want to read from this author again. So I gave this around a 4-star. Then I read one of the most popular books of last year, one of the most critically acclaimed, and one that I was looking forward to from the very second I heard about it. And that is Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow by Gabrielle Zevin. I've read The Storied Life of A.J. Fikry from her before, and I really like that. I've gifted that to family members. So this is about our two main characters, Sam and Sadie. They were childhood friends, but because of a betrayal, they don't talk to each other anymore. They bonded over their love of video games and storytelling, and they meet again in college when Sadie is actually coding her own video games, and the two of them decide to make games together. And that partnership ends up becoming very famous for their first game. They start making their own company, and this is a story of their friendship over the years and the different stories that they tell. You do not need to be a big video game nerd to enjoy this. I think you just need to be interested in storytelling. And also, it is about the friendship and how the friendship interacts with these games. Sadie and Sam have a very fraught relationship. They are constantly doing things that the other person doesn't necessarily agree with. Even though they care about each other so much and are so important to each other's lives, they have a really difficult time always being on the same boat. In that way, it almost reminded me of Normal People, but this is a more healthy relationship, and it is platonic. These characters feel very real very quickly, and seeing the good things and bad things that happen through their lives, their own self-destructive cycles, is so heart-wrenching. And the way that the story is organized, it is in chronological order, but occasionally the narrative uses the characters' reflections on that time from the future, from interviews or stuff that they did. There's dramatic irony of you knowing something terrible is about to happen, but not knowing what it is or what's gonna happen. This is such a fantastic literary fiction that I will be thinking about for a long time, and I will be recommending very widely. So I think I gave this a 4.5 star. Depending on how long this stays in my brain, it could bump up to a 5. Then I read The Inadequate Heir by Danielle L. Jensen. This is the third book in the Bridge Kingdom series. This series is going to be 6 books long, and and 2 books are dedicated to a couple. So the first book follows Lara and Aaron, and Lara is a princess that has been trained to be married off to this enemy king. She's a spy, assassin, everything, and she is sent off to betray this king. So the first 2 books follow those 2 characters and their arc. But book 3, The Inadequate Heir, follows a new couple, and it takes place at the same time as book 2. So we follow Karis, who is Lara's older brother and currently the heir to the Maradrenian throne. He's considered scholarly and he never wants to fight, so everyone thinks he's a coward, and he plays up this role as someone who's not fit for the throne, and he wants an end to the fighting and an end to his father's rule. But he feels like he can't do much because to have power, he has to be in his father's good graces. Meanwhile, we have Zara, who is the heir to the Vendon Empire, and she is a great general. She owes everything to her aunt, and she has led many attacks on the Maradrenian people, and these 2 end up meeting, and they are both anonymous, but they talk to each other about wanting peace, and they start falling for each other, and then they find out who the other person is, and all the drama ensues. I absolutely adore this couple. I thought that I wouldn't like them as much, but it's an entirely different dynamic than Lara and Aaron, which I liked, and it did feel like this story was necessary. I really loved the like star-crossed lovers type vibes. I love how dedicated Karis is to his cause and to Zara, even when Zara does not trust him. And the spice in here is fantastic. I will say, I was expecting this book plot-wise to go past book 2, so what we end up getting is just book 2 from different perspectives. So there aren't as many plot surprises. You know what is going to happen. Danielle L. Jensen has fantastic, unique settings. This one was a very classic, basic fantasy setting, so it didn't really have that awesome element that the other 2 had. While I adored this book and I continue to adore this series, this is technically my least favorite, but it's still a favorite. Absolutely love the series. Again, another 4.5. Then with my book club, we picked The Jasmine Throne by Tasha Suri. This is the first in an Indian-inspired fantasy trilogy. In this world, we are far off from the golden age of the Age of Flowers, and this evil empire is taking over and is pushing its religion and its patriarchal views on all of the cultures around it. And we have one of our characters, Malini, is the sister of the emperor, and he has sent her to burn at the stake for religious purposes. She refuses, and so he exiles her to this former temple of another religion on top of a very dangerous mountain. And our other main character, Priya, she has connections to that old religion and that old temple, and she is hiding that. She is a maidservant, and when Malini accidentally finds out about Priya's background, she decides, oh, I'm gonna have Priya as my maidservant, because Malini is actually being poisoned and is trying to escape her exile. So the 2 of them, even though they are technically on other sides, they decide to team up. The plot synopsis of this has a lot to do with Priya and Malini, but this has a ton of perspectives that we follow that I was excited about because I love a wide scope fantasy, but I honestly felt like that did not fit the story that we were going for. It almost felt like we were spread too thin. I wish that we had more established world building before all these revolutions start happening, because I felt like I didn't have a grounding in what these people are fighting for. Like, I know this guy is evil, but please give me more of an idea of where these people are, how much power they have, what their beliefs are, that sort of thing, other than this guy just being a sexist prick. I did really like the feminist vibes of this, where we are actively fighting patriarchal systems. One of the most powerful characters that we follow who is on our side is a heavily pregnant woman. Loved that. But the thing that I loved most about this book was the relationship between Malini and Priya. They both understand that the other person is dangerous and powerful in a way they are not. And not only does that make them attracted to them, but it also makes them want to work together. I loved the hair washing scene. One of my favorites. I would be interested in reading more from the series if I hear good things about the sequels, but I'm basically invested in the romantic plotline and not so much in the fantasy plotline, and I think that the next book is gonna rely more on the fantasy plot. So we'll see. So this got about a 3.5. And if you would like to join us for the next book we are reading for Forced Proximity, we are going to be reading Dance of Thieves by Mary E. Pearson, and I'm very excited for this. This comes up a lot for Forced Proximity fantasy books because the couple literally gets handcuffed together. Very interested. And I've also enjoyed Mary E. Pearson before. The next book that I read was the last book for the highest rated books I read on my Goodreads TBR. Again, that blog is up here. And that is Know My Name by Chanel Miller. This is a nonfiction memoir about the Stanford assault case. Chanel Miller was attacked when she was unconscious, assaulted by Brock Turner, who was a freshman at Stanford and had a very promising swimming career. And although he was charged with 3 felonies, he was sentenced to only 6 months in a county jail, which is essentially only 3 months because of good behavior rules. So Chanel Miller at the sentencing gave a victim statement that ended up going viral online because of the way that she wrote it and how powerful it was. So this is a memoir of her encounter with the assault, the way that the case and the trauma affected her, and her eventual decision to come public with her name. This was an incredibly impactful read. The first bit in particular was hard to read because of the nature of what it's discussing, but the writing style itself is very easy to read and it is very well done. You feel very connected to Chanel, and this book is actively saving lives. I definitely said more about this in my vlog, so if you want to hear my full thoughts, I would definitely go watch that. Then I read They Never Learn by Lane Fargo. This is a thriller that I have had on my radar for a long time, and honestly, listening to that while reading this was an experience. But this is about Scarlett and Carly, who are both at the same university. Scarlett is a professor who, in her free time, murders men who take advantage of women, and she plays it off as suicides or accidental deaths. After her most recent victim doesn't really fit the profile, there are more investigations going on to the deaths on campus. And Carly is a freshman at the same university, and she is really interested in her roommate, who is popular and bi and is one of the theater kids. And when something bad happens to her roommate, she wants to help her roommate and make sure the perpetrator gets what is coming for him. When it comes to a thriller, I need to be surprised, right? There is a twist about halfway through that totally surprised me, but when it came to twists in the last 90 to 100%, nothing really surprised me. I thought that this was an interesting revenge story, but it didn't necessarily do anything groundbreaking, and if you would have had me write down where this was going to go, I probably could have guessed. It definitely was more queer than I was expecting, which I do love. I don't know that I knew this was queer going into it. Scarlett and Carly are bisexual, so we do get their interactions with both men and women. And I think that if you like How to Get Away with Murder, this might be a book for you. So I gave this, again, around a 3.5 star. Then, at long last, I read Red, White, and Royal Blue by Casey McQuiston. So I was avoiding this when it first came out. I try to reach for own voices type books. So Casey McQuiston is non-binary, but I don't believe they had come out at the time. I am afraid when I see a female presenting person write about male queer experiences. But since then, the other books that they've written have a general queer experience, so I have read both of Casey McQuiston's other books, and I have really loved them, so I thought I might as well give this a shot, and what do you know, this was a great time. This is about the first son of the United States and one of the princes of England. When they have an altercation at a royal wedding, they have to spend a weekend together, but they quickly start realizing that they are interested in each other and they start having a relationship that, because for political reasons, they sort of have to hide. And this is the development of their relationship as they are trying to keep it a secret, but they don't want to have to keep it a secret. Casey McQuiston's characters are so fantastic. You love them. Their humor is so spot on. Their dialogue is perfect, accurately portrays how young people talk, which makes me so happy, and I can't wait for this to get adapted. I want them to write movies, TV shows, because I know that whatever sitcom-y type stuff that they would write, I would be laughing my ass off. I would say that my enjoyment of this was about the same as One Last Stop, but I Kissed Shara Wheeler is still my favorite of their books. I definitely had to suspend some disbelief about some things that happened, like just general things about American politics. But I know that the first family of the United States here was also written as a response to the 2016 election. Generally a lot of fun, and I can't wait for everything that Casey McQuiston writes because perfect. Then, very differently, I read The Catcher in the Rye by J.D. Salinger. I have owned this for so long. This was on the books that I needed to read in 2022, and I'm finally getting around to it, and I can scratch it off of my little poster. So this is about our main character, Holden Caulfield, who is a troubled teenager who is writing to the reader about his experience over a couple of days. At the end of his semester at this boarding school, he has been kicked out of like his third boarding school, and he is going home but spending some time on his own in New York before he ends up going home. And this is mostly him talking about how much he hates pretension and people pretending to be things that they're not, and just him being really upset all the time. The thing I do really appreciate that this book does not condone Holden's thoughts. It is written from his perspective, but you can tell that we are not supposed to agree with him all the time. And we do know that he is at a psychiatric hospital or some sort of therapy type place for him to get the help that he needs, because he very obviously has some sort of mental health problem that has not been addressed, whether that is depression or bipolar or PTSD, something like that. This went by super quickly. I didn't have a problem reading this at all. I thought the 50s slang was interesting, that was just fun to see the modern speech of an older time. Holden Caulfield is a hypocrite, and that is part of it. Like, he talks about how people are always pretending, and then he goes through so many hoops to pretend to be another person when he is around other people. So I definitely do get why this has stuck around. That doesn't mean it's the funnest thing I've ever read. There's some language in here or perspectives towards women that I think weren't great. Like, Holden Caulfield does not see women as complex people, but it's not like he has great opinions of men either. So that was kind of my thought on the fence. There were a couple of little things that were sprinkled throughout about like consent and sex and stuff like that I was kind of like, what are we as the reader supposed to get out of this? But this is, you know, just about a very conflicted teenage person, and I'm glad that the narrative is making sure that he gets the help that he needs after the plot of this. Then I read Riot Baby by Toshi Onyebuchi. So I listened to this on audiobook. It's only 4 hours long. I was working on a crochet project and I basically just knocked this out. And I would be lying if I said I thought that I got the full experience of understanding what happened in this. And I know that it is slightly a confusing read to begin with, but I don't know that I fully understood everything. I think listening to the audiobook, while it is well performed by the author, I think I should have read this physically. This is about Ella and Kevin, who are siblings. Ella has some sort of special power. They call it the Thing. She has a little bit of telekinesis and telepathy. She can go into other people's memories and goes into her family members' memories. And Kevin is her younger brother, and he ends up getting incarcerated for basically just being a black man in America. It starts out with the LA riots in the 1990s, and it comes to a present day where it's more dystopian about the prison system and imprisoning black men. But you know, it's already dystopian in the real world. There isn't a lot of plot that actually happens, but it is the characters experiencing a lot of feelings and going through memories and reflecting on being black in America and the powerlessness that comes with that while Ella has this power. If you're more interested in this book, please read some reviews from black readers and people who understood this book more than I did, because I feel like I can't rate this book because I just didn't grasp it. I feel the same way about this that I felt about No Gods, No Monsters by Caldwell Turnbull. There's a lot going on, and because of that, the audiobook did not serve my understanding very well. But I liked the themes that I did get from it. So I am going to refrain from rating this book. And the last book that I read, such an accomplishment that I actually did finish it. That is Jade Legacy by Fonda Lee. This is the last book in the Green Bone saga. This is an urban fantasy world, not too dissimilar to our own, but the main difference is that Jade has special powers that when certain people who have the aptitude for it have Jade on them, they can have slightly superhuman abilities, mainly telekinetic type energy. So this whole series is about the city of Janloon on the island of Keikon, which is inspired by Japan. There are two gangs, the No Peak clan and the Mountain clan, who are fighting over control of the city, and they have a blood feud because they are killing each other, and we follow the No Peak clan. The Call siblings are all in charge of the No Peak clan and all of the maneuvering that they have to do. This book in particular has the least centralized plot. We start the book, it says the 6th year, and by the end we are almost in the 30th year. So this book takes place over the longest amount of time, and when I was reading the beginning of it, that really bothered me. That pacing was a lot, and this book was definitely different from what I expected in terms of what the plot was going to be. This one has more maneuvering and less violence than the last books had, as the clans are sort of at a standstill and they are playing long games against each other. I really adore these characters. Wen and Andon are probably my favorite characters. I love Shay as well. We get to meet a lot of the younger generation, so they're children in this book and they get their own personalities now that they're older, which I really enjoyed. And I loved the conclusion of how these clans have changed over the years and how this generation has shaped the clans. The more that I think about this book and the more time I spend after finishing it, the more that I appreciated it. I would think that Jade War was my favorite. It had the most centralized plot, but this was definitely more of an undertaking and had a wider scope of what it was trying to do. The skipping of years and months makes sense in this context. This fantasy series is absolutely fantastic, and if you haven't read it yet, what are you doing? I now really want to make some more crochet dolls of these characters. I particularly want to make a Hilo one. But yes, with very little battery left and my body wanting me to go to sleep, those are all the books that I read in January and February, and more books just fell over. So, as always, thank you so much for watching, and if you've read any of these books or want to read any of these books, working on any of these series, please let me know. I want to talk with you about them, and let me know what were your favorite books that you read in these past 2 months. If you would like to follow me anywhere, my link is in the description, including a link to my Etsy shop and my book club. Please go check those out, and as always, I will see you in the next one.